In the next two videos I'm going to show you how to take samples and prepare them to send off to a laboratory for a chain of custody test for both urine and saliva. First of all, I want to go through the chain of custody test consent form, and this test that we've just done is a urine test, so I'm going to follow through the process of how to fill this out as if you'd done a urine test. So to start, donor organisation or company is COC Construction. It's just a fictitious company I've made up. Date of the test is 19th of the 9th 2023. When you get these forms, where it says business unit or cost centre, the word Claritest will already be written in there because that's the laboratory that are going to process the samples. Location of the test for COC Construction was in Burnley, and then I'll put the postcode there, BN470Y. The donor details, date of birth 07/07/1990, first name David, second name or last name Smith. You don't need to fill in any of the other details here about identifying the donor. Hopefully you'll know that the person sitting in front of you is the person you're supposed to be testing, and so you don't need anybody to identify that person. So after first and last name, you're going to need to move to the reason for test. So the reason for this test was a for-cause test, but it could be something like pre-employment, post-incident, random follow-up, or some other reason. If there's another reason that isn't listed there, you'll need to write that in where it says other. You then read the donor consent to test, and once you've read it, if they agree to the test and they agree with the statement, then you simply ask them to print their name, D. Smith, and you ask them to sign it. Forget the next bit once again, because you're not going to be filling any of the details out. All you need now is the medical declaration filled out. And so you're going to need to write down what medication they've taken in the last 14 days. This person had taken 2 cocodamol, 30 over 500mg tablets at 7:30 this morning. So I wrote the details of the medication that he'd taken there. Moving down to the next part here, you do the POC test, so you'll need to tick the box POCT, and you'll need to state whether that test was a urine test or an oral fluid test. In this case, it's a urine test, so you'll need to tick the urine box. You then come back to your initial test that you did, whether it was urine or saliva. This was a urine test, so I simply wrote the details from the test kit, your point of care test, or otherwise known as POCT. I wrote that onto the form, so I wrote the lot number and expiry date. If it's a urine test, you'll need to say whether that urine was in temperature range, and if you remember when we did the pot, when we do these tests, you would have looked at the thermometer on the front of the kit, so you can say that it was in the temperature range of between 32 and 38. Was there sufficient sample, i.e. did the donor urinate up to the minimum fill volume line? And did you detect any adulteration? Was the sample cold? Did it look like water? Was it a different colour? Anything that suggested to you that the sample may have been adulterated. Time of test was 9:45, and because with these type of kits you can read the results straight away, I read the result at 9:47. Underneath that, you'll need to say what the result of this test was it negative or non-negative? You would only be moving to a chain of custody test if it was a non-negative result, so I ticked non-negative here. And this person had failed the initial test for 3 drugs, ketamine, cannabis, and opioids. The opioid, I suggest, would be because they'd taken cocodamol that morning, but it also failed, apart from prescribed medication, failed for 2 of the illegal drug groups. I then read the donor declaration to them and asked them to print their name and sign it. I then, as the collector, put my name, signed it, and my collector's organisation, which is simply drug testing or SD testing. And the last thing I then asked them to do was to initial and date the 2 tamper-proof evidence seals at the bottom, one marked A and one marked B. If you were doing an oral fluid or saliva chain of custody test, the only differences in the form would be when we get to the POCT part here. It was still a POCT test, point of care test, but instead of urine it was an oral fluid test. I still wrote the lot number and expiry date as I did before. However, now, because it's a saliva test, we're not concerned as to whether the urine was in temperature range or whether there was sufficient sample, because that's non-applicable with this type of test. Apart from that, the rest of this test consent form is exactly the same. whether it be for urine or saliva, and that's how to complete a chain of custody test consent form ready to send off to the laboratory.